Good morning, everyone. My name is Larry McDonough. I'm Principal Evangelist for BlackBerry, and my partner in the brains on the stage is Shadid Hack. And Shadid going to do the second half of the presentation, and I'm going to start us off. I'm also we'll be swapping some machines and devices and various things to show you some demos as we go. I'm going to do the first part of the presentation actually on my BlackBerry Z10, or if you're Canadian, or Z10. All right, so what we're talking about is the invocation framework. So what is the invocation framework? What does it mean? What do you do with it? How does it work? Those kinds of things are questions we're going to ask and answer, not just ask. So a couple of things that it does, it's very important to understand is from the framework, or from your application, you can invoke another app or another task. You can embed apps inside of other apps, which is a really cool feature. And today, this is the only way still to transfer data from one application to another. And we'll give some examples of each of those different types of capability. And we should have some time at the end, right, Shadid, for questions if people have questions? Yeah. Okay. So the way the framework works is there's a couple different types of invocations you can make. There's a bound invocation, which is an invocation where your application, which on these pictures is on the left-hand side. So if your app is app 1, right, and you're making a bound invocation, basically what that means is you're asking the framework to invoke or launch or process. You're trying to call a particular type of thing specifically. So in other words, you might say, I want this particular app to handle my invocation. So you explicitly describe the application you want. So for instance, give me an example. If I'm the pictures application, and or you're an application that has images in it, and you want to invoke the pictures application, that maybe is a better example. So if the user clicks on a picture, instead of writing your own image viewer, you can specifically invoke the pictures app. So you say, I want the pictures app to handle this request. Okay, does that make sense? So the invocation is bound in that sense. You're defining which one you want. The second type of invocation is an unbound invocation. And that's where you don't necessarily know which application needs to launch, or even better, you're going to let the user decide which one they want to use. So for instance, the invocation framework on the device will know what types of applications can handle a particular task. So if it's to view a picture, the invocation framework and your application says, I would like to user clicked on an image, I want to bring up a picture viewer. So it says, your application basically says the invocation framework, who out there can, view these pictures, right? And the invocation framework comes back with, I've got 3 different types of applications that can handle that type of request, right? And then the user gets to choose. And that's very nice, it's a nice way to allow the user to, continue to use the applications they prefer, rather than always, specifically launch a particular one, for instance. So it's a very nice, user experience in that case. And the third type of invocation, which is not really a separate type, but rather variations of each of these, is the type where you don't actually invoke anything, but you make a query. So you query the framework for, does this application exist, or is there anyone out there that can handle this type of task or request? So that's a really good one to use in the case of a bound invocation. So for instance, let's say your application works really well with this type of viewer, that type of viewer, and the third type of image viewer. But there's one that you don't, that doesn't work right or isn't as good of an experience. So you can query the framework and find out if there's, if that one that isn't really a good experience is the only one there. Or if there's multiples, you can then do, you can get a list of them. You can then do the bring up your own sort of invocation style of the other ones explicitly mentioned. Does that make sense? So you can kind of do your own little, manage the user experience better that way by checking to see what's available. So opportunity. This is essentially what the invocation framework is all about, right? It's providing you guys, providing developers with an opportunity to be discovered, to have your application used more and more frequently by more people and more engaged. So if if your application isn't using the framework, and by the way, I should have mentioned that, to be a built for BlackBerry application, you need to satisfy a service requirement, right? And the invocation framework is the easiest of all of the service requirements to satisfy. And it's the most important one, right? Our esteemed body of built for BlackBerry judges look at this one very, very carefully. And why? It's because the invocation framework, the ability to invoke other applications, makes your applications feel and flow just like BlackBerry 10 experience. So if you look at BlackBerry 10, almost everything you do, I mean, the invocation framework is like sprinkled all over it. So as you get to know the user experience on the device, and you understand what the invocation framework is, you'll start seeing it everywhere. You go, every time you click on an icon to do anything and something new comes up, you go, oh, that's an invoke. You'll start to get the feel of it. So it's a big opportunity. It's the easiest one to put into built for BlackBerry, and it's the most important. So why use built for BlackBerry, or the Invoke framework? Like I said, it helps you stay with the flow, right? So if there's been a lot of research out there that has shown that regardless of framework, whether it's our platform, if it's our platform or any other platform, if your application is feeling kind of like it's a native to the flow of the device, regardless of what flow that is, those applications are much more successful. And it's just proven, right? So BlackBerry 10 and the BlackBerry Flow and the experience is a unique one. So make your application fit into that, and you're going to have a really engaged audience and a much higher much higher business out of that. One of the reasons is because it's increased discoverability. So if users just buy your application, right, and only ever get that application when they click on it, you're not going to have very high engagement. But if your application registers itself as I can handle text, I can handle pictures, I can do this, right? Then anytime any other application is going to use the framework and say, does anyone out there handle pasting text or whatever the task at hand is? Your application is going to be in that list. It's going to say, yeah, I do that, right? And it shows up in a menu somewhere. And then you go, oh, yeah, I remember that application. I liked that one. Why am I not running that one more, right? So it just keeps the concept of the application fresh in the user's mind, and it also makes the whole platform flow better. You have a much more symbiotic application ecosystem. So in another way, too, the way I like to think of it is, when you sit down to write an application, don't just think about, how your user would flow through your application. Like you have to step back with the invocation framework capability. You step back and say, gosh, how will I flow with all of BlackBerry 10? Where are the touch points that my app should make sense? And and the reason that's important is you'll design your application differently. Right? You'll start to think, oh, I should separate this particular piece of functionality that I need for my application. I should separate that into a special little, type of tasks, management, so that my app can be invoked to handle that task by other apps. And when you start to think that way, you go, wow, that's really powerful. There are lots of really cool things you can do with that. In fact, we do that in our own applications. I'll give you some examples. So these are various examples of and all of these screenshots you're going to see are BlackBerry Flow, right? So and they're common to you, and they're kind of half. What I'm showing here is like on the left, you'll see the email application, but then there's a half of a screen kind of flowing in. So we're sort of capturing the animation in midstream here. But what the user did in the email app is they clicked on that text object, right, which invoked a particular viewer to view that text, and it's sliding in, right? So it just comes in on top as a card. So that application is now using this viewer, email application. It's using that viewer. Another example is the box application gets a notification right? And then you have an option at the bottom to open box, right? So that actually is an invocation there. Third one here is you're in your file manager and you're looking at documents, right? And you want to share them. So the share option, the share capability is also an invoke. Another good one is the contacts. So in this case, this is our own application. I told you I would give you an example of our own application, using an invoke. So our own application, the contact list, to create a new contact, it actually does an invoke on itself. So, and the reason is, any other application now that wants to create a contact, right? Why not just use the one that's already built? It's in the system. Right, so you can query the framework. Does anybody know how to create me a contact? And our own application, contact application, will say, yeah, I can do that. But you can write one too, right? So that's a good example. Here's another one of the Twitter application, right, using the share framework. And you'll notice at the bottom, one of the options brought in, because it was an unbound invocation, and one of the options brought in was to upload to ODS. So it's a third-party application kind of brought in right into the menu. And on the right here is the music player application. And you're seeing that you can do a share right from there. That will invoke the share framework and allow you to do other things with it, send that elsewhere. And then also, there's an email invocation. So it says contact developer, right? So you can immediately send an email. So that's going to invoke the email application. There's lots of examples of this. I think this is my last screen, and I'll actually show you a live one just so you can get the feel of it. So the camera application you can share as well. Any of those pictures. In fact, that's one of the ones I'll show you. In the video application, you can also do a share, or you can do sort of an open data space. This is a third-party application that shows up in the invocation there. And then the last one, again, is your document viewer, and you're allowed to, or given the option to open in slideshow to go. Right? So these are cases where you're going to invoke another application, right, explicitly or implicitly. And then, since I'm doing this, yeah. So let me show you an example. This is I'm just using my device here. So I go to my Pictures app, and I'm going to select a picture. Anybody recognize this? I rode this twice last night. It's freaking awesome, this ride. This is a rocket. Anyway, so if I click on this picture, right, I can share it. Open the share, and then any of these different ways of sharing. See, even WhatsApp, because I installed WhatsApp. WhatsApp is an third-party application that says, oh, I know I can handle pictures. I can do stuff with pictures, so you can share with me. But there's lots of different cases here. So if you have an application that can do something with the picture, you make sure you tell the framework about it, because then you get launched here. Another case is the search option, which is kind of cool. You guys are familiar with universal search. I'm going to select the little, magnifying glass at the bottom, and it brings up, a search. I can just start typing. I'll just type my name. That's sure to bring up stuff. Okay, so it brings up people in the contact list whose name is Larry. Why am I not there? I just realized that. There's 3 more results. That's why. Got it. There's documents, that have my name. Those must be slide decks with my name in it. There's some music with my name, that kind of thing. If you keep going, these would all bring up Invoke, right? And the third-party applications show up down below. So Foursquare, the maps or whatever. Your application can be down here too if you had the name Larry in it somewhere. So there's 2 examples of the share framework in action, or the invocation framework in action. So I think the most important thing to think about, and this goes back to the idea of structuring your application a little differently to make sure you're more easily discovered, and increase the engagement with the user. And kind of a nice way to sum this up is to let the app find the user, not the user find the app. So with that, I think I'm going to transfer over to my colleague. I'll switch.
Okay. Get the clicker. All right, thanks, Larry. That was fantastic. Thanks a lot. Hi, guys. My name is Shadid. I work in the dev relations team at research at BlackBerry now. And one of my focus areas has been invocation framework since last year. Larry mentioned a lot of opportunities, a lot of motivations to why you want to integrate with invocation framework, right? So you really want to be part of that BlackBerry Flow experience, and your application will be discovered by users instead of more frequently than if the user was just launching it from the home screen, right? Much better experience, flows really well with BlackBerry Flow, and more importantly, users will expect that from your application. Because if we have anything to learn from the core applications, this is probably lesson number 1. Integrate with invocation framework. Because if you look at all our core applications, they all do it to maintain that flow experience and forget about that in and out paradigm, right? So I'm going to start with more technical details of how you can incorporate this framework and how much little code you need to write for this. So how many people are familiar with ROC? That's expected because I invented that. So it's pretty much stands, it's stupid. It pretty much stands for return on code. How much code do you want to write for how much you get out of it, right? So its invocation ROC is really high, right? With really few lines of code, you get all that good stuff that Larry talked about. So let's look at invocation in more detail. So the first thing you want to understand is a request, right? So with any framework, with invocation framework, you basically send a request to perform or do something, right? And this request envelope has several parameters that you can set. The first one is target ID. I have that separated because that impacts the invocation a lot, right? So Larry talked about bound versus unbound invocations. So if you are doing a bound invocation, that's where you specify which applications you want to invoke, right? If it's there, it's going to invoke. If it's not there, it's not going to invoke. It's not going to look at anything else, right? So target ID is the parameter you want to set if you want to do a bound invocation, right? If you don't specify a target ID, then all the rest comes into play, okay? So invocation framework basically sits in the middle as the broker between the calling application and the available targets who can perform that action, right? But as soon as you specify the target ID, it forgets about brokering. It actually goes completely dumb and just invokes the target application with whatever you have set. And God help that target application, right? Because there was no filtering. So you have to be very careful when you do a bound invocation. That's the point. You have to make sure that your data, the other parameters you're providing, is understood by the target application, because there will be no brokering, no filtering by the framework. Okay, now with that out of the way, if you don't set a target ID, then comes the brokering. So there are 3 parameters, essentially, that invocation framework uses to broker between you and the target application. The first one is the action. So what do you want to do? Do you want to open something? Do you want to share something? Do you want to, I don't know, eat something? It's all in the action. So action pretty much defines what you want to do. Then comes the MIME type or the content type, right? So the action needs to be performed, usually the action needs to be performed on some data, right? And the MIME type parameter is where you set the type of your data. And then comes the actual data of the invocation request. In the data, now you can specify data in 2 ways. Either you can specify data as a byte array, so that goes as part of the invocation, attached to the invocation request, or if you have a larger data, which cannot fit the invocation request because the request can only fit around 12 to 16 KB of data. That includes all the parameters, by the way. So if it's larger than that, it's much safer if you just put it in the file system somewhere, or it could be in the web somewhere over HTTP. You just specify that URI where it points to the data of this invocation request. And all of these play a role in the brokering stage of the invocation. So once you do an invoke request without a target ID, the invocation framework will look for these, will try to match these action, MIME type, and the URI scheme to make sure that the target application is capable of handling this request. Okay, so it's much safer to do unbound invocation, and we actually want to promote unbound invocations more than bound invocation. So you should really not try to do bound invocation unless you have to, unless it's a special case, right? Because the beauty of unbound invocation is, as the calling application or the requestee, the requester, you don't have to know the targets, right? The framework will find the best guy for you based on what they've said to the framework, right? I'm hoping they've said the truth. So it's always recommended to do an unbound invocation so that you let the user discover more apps through your application. You let the user discover more capabilities that they can carry out from your application, right? And you don't even have to know what's out there. So let's look at some code. How easy can invocation get? Just 4 lines of code. This sends an invocation request, and it actually invokes another application. So the first step of any invocation is to get an instance of Invoke Manager. So that's pretty much your central class, because that has methods like invoke, right? And the next step is obviously to set up your request object, which is an Invoke Request, which comes from an Invoke Request class. And inside that Invoke Request object, you specify the parameters we just talked about. So in this case, I'm only setting the URI, which points to somewhere in the file system and points to a sample.pdf, right? But notice that I did not specify anything else. What's going to happen? Is it going to blow up? Is it going to invoke somebody? So what's going to happen is, here are some of the subtle things about invocation framework that it does for you. When you set a URI to a PDF file, invocation framework saves it as, okay, it's a PDF file. I know that type. I know that content type, so it's going to automatically fill the MIME type for you. And it also doesn't know what action to perform. But it actually does, because for each MIME type, there is a default action in invocation framework. So it's going to use open in this case, or view, for example. And with just that URI, the framework actually understood what you wanted to do with the default values, right? So it'll actually carry out the invocation, and it won't fail. It'll invoke the Adobe Reader application that's preloaded on the device, or if there were any third-party options, it could do that as well. The last step is just to call invoke manager.invoke with your request object. And we're done. So that's how you do an unbound invocation. That was an unbound invocation, right? Right? Okay. So because we didn't specify any target ID. Now, the other thing you can do is you can also query the framework without invoking anybody. So this is super useful, as Larry mentioned, if you want to just see what's there, right? Because sometimes there are cases where you want to see which applications are available for my request and which ones do I want to invoke, right? Or if you want to show a fancy user interface to give the user choices, right? So you can query in a very similar way that we set up our invocation. So instead of creating an invoke request, you will actually create an invoke query request, right? And that will perform the query for you and return you a list of applications that are available on the device for that request, okay? And that will have information like the application's name, the icon of the application, the capabilities of the application as when it comes to invoking, And you can, customize a lot based on that. But this is not really for everybody, but if you need that, it's there, right? Now comes my favorite part. You've seen some examples when Larry was showing a demo. This is showing the share card of the platform. So remember when I talked about query, I talked about you get a list back, then you show a fancy UI to give the user an option. Now, there is a way to bypass that and still have that, and let the system do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So instead of querying the framework, creating the UI for the list, and showing the UI, and then letting the user choose, then doing a bound invocation to the chosen application, all that can be handled automatically. And for that, there is a class called the Invocation class. Okay, it's a bit off track from Invoke Manager, but it does exactly that. So what you do essentially is pretty much what you did with requests. You create an invocation object, you wrap an invoke query inside that invocation object, and then you set your parameters, right? And once you do that, you call trigger on this invocation object, and this comes up. Now, you didn't have to create this. You didn't have to query. You didn't have to create this list. You didn't have to populate this list, or you didn't even have to, do bound invocation based on user selection. All that is done automatically if you just do that. Okay, this is just one other way to, if you want to talk about ROC, just look at that, right? It's huge. I mean, but one caveat to this is this will only work for actions that are defined by the platform itself. So when we talked about actions, we talked about, open, set, share, view, all these, right? So these are actually platform actions. So platform understands or has information about them within the system, right? But you can also create your own custom action. But if you use a custom action here, it's not going to work for this. Because for this to work, the platform needs to know, okay, what is that action? What text do I show as the title, right? What icon do I show as the action item, right? So all that branding information is not there. So if you do a custom action here, it's not going to work. So you have to use platform actions such as share, open, view, or set, stuff like that, right? And those are really very popular actions. And all apps has ways to use that. Right? So now comes the most exciting part. Now we've seen how we invoke, but there's also a way how you can get invoked. Right? Larry talked about discoverability. This is how to get it. So if you make yourself invocable and you tell the system that, okay, I can do this, right? And the system will start considering you from that point on, whenever anybody else does an invoke request. So if your capabilities match the request the framework receives, you'll start showing up in other apps, right? So that's one way of letting the app find the user, not the user finding the app all the time. And users will discover new ways to use your application. And it really goes well with the BlackBerry Flow experience. And this is pretty much how to get it. And this is really, it's even simpler than invoking. All you need to do, open your bar descriptor.xml, and you start defining targets. So the tag you want to use is invoke-target, and you give it an ID. That's mandatory. You must have an ID when you're defining a target. And then you define a name for the target, what text you want to show up as when people invokes you, and an icon. What icon should the framework show when you start showing up, right? With just those three information, you are now a candidate to be invoked. You don't need anything else down below, just with those three information. Because remember, for bound invocations, invocation framework doesn't do any brokering. So you don't have to specify your capabilities. You just need a target ID, and invocation framework just blindly invokes you with whatever it got, right? So that's how you become a candidate for a bound invocation. Now, if you want to start showing up in unbound invocation or in share cards or in queries, you want to define your capabilities. Now, before I do capabilities, which is essentially filters here, I want to talk about the type attribute or the type tag. The type tag specifies what kind of invocation target you are. So there are two types, application and card. What are the differences? Applications gets invoked in a new window. Not a good experience. Users usually don't like it. Cards does not load in a new window. It gets embedded right into the calling app. Just slides in. That's a much better experience. So once you know about cards, how many people actually want to do application invoke? No one, right? Because cards is such a better experience, right? And if you, unless your invoke case needs to show the full application for some reason, I don't know, you should never use application targets. You should always be of type card. It's a much better experience. Users will love it. The calling applications will love it. Everybody's happy. Now let's talk about filters. Filters basically allows you to describe what action you support, just like the request. See, there is a one-to-one matching because at the end of the day, the framework has to match the request with your filter. So you can specify the MIME type, the URI schemes you can handle, for example, file : or HTTP : // or you can also register for a custom URI scheme. That's fine too. And MIME type, when it comes to MIME type, you can also specify your own custom MIME type. But it's always recommended to use well-known MIME types so that you can start showing up in unknown number of applications, right? Because if you do anything custom, no one's going to know about it, right? How do you promote your application to other developers to invoke you? So I talked about filter, I talked about MIME type, talked about the action. The other parameter is the, I talked about URI as well. That's pretty much it. That's how you define filters. And that's how you start showing up in unbound invocations, right? All right, so it's nothing like the real thing. So let's do a quick live demo. I'll have to switch devices here. Should have done that before. Okay. So these, I'm going to show you two sample applications, and both of these are available on our GitHub repository for Cascade samples. So I'm going to show you the target application first. When you launch from the home screen, the target application actually shows a different UI. Basically describes what it can do as a sample application, right? It's not that you're going to describe like that. So when the user launches you from the home screen, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to show the full experience of your application. So this guy has 3 targets, and there are all cards. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about cards is cards comes in 3 flavors: composers, previewers, and pickers. Now, all of these are really nothing special. They're all cards at the end of the day. They all get embedded. They all get invoked in the same way. The only difference is how they show up. Do they slide in from the right, or do they slide in from the bottom? Okay? That's pretty much the only difference. But there are some more subtleties to that, but you can always go to the documentation page and read all about it. So this target has a composer that can handle the action share, MIME type text/plain. So let's try that. I'll have to go all the way. Invoke client. I also have Invoke client application that can do quite a few things, actually. It's basically a test application where you can provide all the parameters, and then you can test out things in Invoke. So I'm going to do an unbound invocation first. So to do that, I'm going to select that action at the bottom, invoke, in the bracket best fit. That's how I named it. And this brings the best application to share with when it comes to a black screen. Okay, now it's coming up. So the invocation framework thought the best would be to share it with the BBM group, right? That's how invocation framework goes. So I'm going to cancel that. My BBM is really acting up today, starting this morning after I joined some group. I don't know what happened. Okay, so that's unbound, right? Now, you can also do bound invocations. So I'm going to do a bound invocation to my target just to double check. Actually, I forgot the target ID for that. Anyways, forget it. If I put in a target ID that's exactly the same as my target applications, it'll actually invoke that. Okay. Now let's move. I'm going to move on to query now. So I'm going to show you how to query the framework. So this is what happens. So when I hit query, my application actually did a query with the invocation framework, got a list back, populated a list, created the UI for it, and showed you the UI. So if you want to do a custom experience for when it comes to giving the user choices, and you can also filter out stuff from here, right, as you wish. Notice my target application showed up. The sample composer is actually from my target application. So if I select that, it's going to do a bound invocation to my target application. And that's what my target application shows when its composer card is launched. See, the interesting thing to see is the target application, the full application is still running. But at the same time, there is a new instance of it running inside another application. So every time you launch a card from an application, it actually creates a new process, new instance of your application. So you have to be very careful not to load the full application, because every time you get invoked, it's going to be a new process, right? So you have to make sure that you only load the stuff in your application that are, relevant to this context, right? So you should never load the full UI or the full application logic either. So I'm just going to show you one more thing here. One of the beauties of invocation framework when it comes to invoking cards is that you can peek back, right? You can peek back to the calling application, although these are two separate applications running on top of each other. And the interesting part is the calling application actually gets the signal that the user is peeking back at you, right? So you see the peek status saying started. That's because the calling application got a signal that the user is peeking back at him. So if you want to show something more contextual for peeking back, you could do that. So I'm just going to cancel it. And as you can see at the bottom, it's saying don't feel like sharing today. So when I hit cancel, or when I do anything, when the card closes, the card actually has the ability to send a response back. So in this case, my card actually said the user didn't share anything. So, and the client application is programmed to understand that the user didn't share. So it's not a one-way channel, right? So you can invoke a card and get a response back from the card as well. There is a classic example of the camera application where you can invoke the camera application to take a picture, and once the picture is taken, the card closes and gives you the URI back to the picture, right? So you could start thinking about use cases like that. Now, the last thing I'm going to show is the platform invocation, the last code sample I had, to have that query automatically done for you, to have that UI list, a list of invocation targets automatically done for you. Here's how it goes. As soon as I select this platform invoke, that's how I named it. It doesn't have to be platform invoke. As soon as I click it, the system card comes up. This is not mine. I just sent a request saying I want to share text/plain with somebody, right? And the system actually lists all the applications that are capable of doing that. And notice that sample composer, which comes from my target sample application, is also listed there, right? So that's the power, right? That's the discoverability piece of invocation framework. So I don't have to know what applications are out there. Let the framework figure it out. Let the framework give the user choices. And they love it because that's how the core applications work, right? Okay. Just wondering if there's anything else I want to show, but not for the time being. We can switch back to the slides if you. All right. So now comes the fun part of how you can integrate with core applications. Now, one of the advantages of integrating with core applications is that they're always there. They're guaranteed to be there, right? So even if you do a bound invocation, you can be guaranteed that it's going to work, right? But if it's a third-party application, it may or may not be there. So you better not do it. You probably should not do a bound invocation because it may not be there. There's a good chance that it's not there. But we're going to look into integrating with core applications because users want that. Because core applications are usually killer apps, like emails, phone application, camera application. They're essentials, right? People can't live without them. So when it comes to integrating with core application, we actually have a long list of applications that you can integrate with. If it's a document, when it comes to documents, you can invoke the Adobe Reader application. You can invoke the Docs2Go application to view, be it PDF files or document files or Excel files or, what have you, or PowerPoint slides. You can invoke them to open, to edit those files, to view those files, all the basic needs for your applications. When it comes to multimedia, you can invoke the camera application to capture a picture for you and get a pointer to that picture once that's taken. You can invoke the media player. You don't have to reinvent a media player in your application unless you are a specialized media playing app. To play video files or any files that are supported by the system, you can invoke the picture viewer or the picture application to view pictures, what have you. When it comes to communicate, you can invoke the email application to compose emails, to pre-populate the fields of the composer card of email. Same goes for text messages. And when it comes to making a call, you can invoke the phone applications to make a call right from your application. Very useful stuff. And I would be really shocked if there is one app that does not fit any of these invoke cases. So it's really hard not to integrate with Invocation Framework, to be honest. But there are applications that doesn't do it. And what's important to understand is you don't really have to spend much time to do it. It's really easy, really gets you that check mark for built for BlackBerry services. And this is, like Larry said, it's one of the most important services you want to integrate with if you want to shoot for built for BlackBerry. When it comes to productivity, things like calendars, remember application, or the search, you can integrate with them, seamlessly with very little amount of code. One thing interesting about the search application is that you can not only invoke the search application to search for stuff, but you can also become a target for the search application. So when Larry was showing the demo for the search application, he brought up the search screen, and as soon as he starts typing, at the very bottom there was a section for third-party apps, like the extended search. So when the user clicks on one of them, what happens is the search application actually invokes you with the search keywords, or whatever the user has typed, right? So you can then get that data and show some search result inside your application. It's a very smooth flow of how users can search, not only throughout the system application, but inside third-party applications as well. When it comes to social, Invocation Framework is the best answer, right? So you can, when it comes to BBM, you can set profile picture, you can set status, you can share text, pictures, video files, what have you. Same goes for Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, but one thing special for them is you can also invoke these Twitter applications or the social applications to show a specific profile. So if you want to show your company's profile on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, that's the way to go, right? YouTube, super convenient. If your application produces video content, you can just share it with YouTube and it'll upload the video. All that heavy lifting is already done for you. So the whole point is do not reinvent, but invoke, unless you have a special experience for the user, right? So if it's something already on the system, there is no point of redoing it. Just invoke and you get these for free, right? And it doesn't have to be core application. You can, actually, let's hold that thought for a moment before that I want to talk about how you can get invoked by core applications. Now, we've seen one example that is for search, but you can also, there are also cases where many other core applications actually invokes, right? And in fact, all of them do. Some of them does bound invocations to other core applications, but some of them do unbound invocations too. Now, I understand, and I'll admit it, that we have not documented that very well, and we will as soon as we finalize everything. But the best way to go for now is to support the platform actions, open, view, set, and share. So as soon as you do this, for the content type you can handle, you'll automatically start showing up in core applications. But at the same time, I do recognize that you need details. You need details on what does the email app invokes exactly. What does the picture app invokes exactly, right? So that you can play the right game to start showing up in those applications. So stay tuned. Documentations are definitely coming for them. Now, invocation is not really very racist between third parties and core applications, right? It works exactly the same way for any applications. And you can, like we discussed, you can invoke third-party application. You can get invoked as a third-party applications. But the real challenge have been, how do other third parties know what you're capable of? Because it's really hard to advertise what you can do to other developers, right? So that's not the case anymore. We're changing that by introducing a dedicated documentation page for third-party invokes. We're creating a portal where you can log in with your vendor ID, and it'll list all the applications you have for sale. You can pick one of them, and this will take you to this screen where you'll have the action, the MIME type, the URI schemes you can handle, all pre-populated for you, but it'll have a few free-form text fields, because those are really not understandable from the filter. So you can have a description, you can have the description of the data you accept, you can have the description of the metadata you accept. Now, metadata is something I did not talk about because I thought that was too much details, but there is another parameter in the Invoke request called metadata, right? So you can have some extended data parameter inside metadata. For example, if you're playing music, your data could be some description about the music, but the metadata can qualify the artist or the song title, stuff like that. So it's useful for some use cases, but just know that it's there. So let's, looking ahead to the future, I'm going to go quickly through where we're taking invocation framework and why you should invest early. Larry talked about third-party notifications going into the hub. The notification card slides in, shows the notification, and there is an open action down there. It's not a very good experience in many cases where you may have an instant messaging app or a social app that can share content. As soon as the user clicks on that notification, it should bring in the actual card from the application instead of this intermediate screen, right? So that's where we're trying to go for third-party applications as well. So this is an example from the Twitter app. That's how it works today. You click on a Twitter message, it actually slides in the Twitter message viewer, not the intermediate screen, right? But for third parties, it's not available yet, but we are working really hard to get this out for third parties as well. Headless applications, some of you may have heard, we are designing a headless framework, and invocation framework, again, will be in the middle of all this, right? So essentially what's going to happen is instead of having your application run all the time, you'll have triggers in the system, like new email message, new SMS, or new phone call, and you'll get invoked based on those triggers. Now, these triggers are not in no way our final list, or I'm not even going to say that it's going to look like any of this, but this is definitely one of the options we're looking at. So we'll have triggers that'll invoke your application instead of having your application run all the time in the background. Something interesting we're thinking about doing in the BlackBerry World is to have, right now when you do an unbound invocation, it only lists the application that are on the device. But if you are capable of getting invoked, we're thinking about listing an option for the user to get more applications from App World that can handle this. So fantastic opportunities, guys. I mean, I'll be shocked, honestly, if someone decides not to integrate with Invocation Framework. This is the, this is the life of BlackBerry Flow. This is the backbone of BlackBerry Flow, and you should really integrate with that. I'm sure there are lots of questions, and that's why we're here. So whoever has the first question, raise the first hand. Yes.
Thinking the Invoke would be possible in the future, like use this as like a authentication mechanism to, for example, like OAuth or the like account manager on other platforms, like for my application to be able to use like Facebook and Twitter to log in.
Okay, if I understood the question correctly, the question is, can we use single sign-on for Facebook, Twitter, or all other social apps? Your question, I'm not sure if that question is related to Invocation Framework. It's somewhat related because it actually works today. The way it works today is when you invoke to share something over Facebook or Twitter, the user doesn't have to log in. The share card comes in with the Twitter Composer screen or the Facebook Composer's card, and then just start typing and share, or have that pre-populated and just share that, right? So there is no concept of signing in when it comes to sharing. But if you're interested in more integrated experience with Twitter, I would not recommend Invocation for that. You should talk directly to Twitter in those cases, right? But for simple cases like sharing stuff, we already have a card. You don't have to reinvent that. Sharing a picture, all that good stuff. Yeah, great question. Fully understand, but I think we should. There is something in the works. I'll talk to you offline about that. It's not really related to Invocation. That's why I'm skipping it. Next question. Yes.
Thank you. I was kind of curious if the Invocation Framework is available in WebWorks.
Oh, great question. So the question is...
after that, I have another question.
Yes.
You talked about cards. How is it different from, let's say, a tab screen? And if you could tell me the advantages.
Difference from...
Like a tab screen, you have a screen with a lot of tabs.
Tab view.
Okay.
Tab,
Yeah.
you got it? Like on a web browser or something like that.
Okay.
I just want to know the advantages of...
Okay. So the first question is all these good stuff... Are all this good stuff available on WebWorks? Yes. Are all this good stuff available on Adobe Air? Yes. The second question is, what is the difference between invoking a card versus having tabs in your UI, right? The difference, they're actually completely sort of unrelated, because tabs are part of your full UI experience, where user launches your application and you have 3 tabs, right? But whereas invoking cards is something like the application, the calling application is invoking a portion of your app or sending a request, then you decide what portion to embed on top of the calling application. So I'm not sure if I answered the question correctly, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it it's a question of what do you want your user experience to be. So if you think about, I would like my user to, to have this dynamic, interface, right? Then maybe, cards coming in that take over the whole screen maybe don't satisfy that, user experience. So you just have to kind of think, what's the right mechanism to use for the experience you want? This mechanism is really good for, invoking other applications that can solve tasks for you. Like you have a problem at hand. Some user wants to share something. They want to send a message. They want to, do something with some content. You go to the framework. Does anybody know how to do this task? Give me the list of the 3 guys or however many there are out there. Populate them, and then you give the user. So it's a totally different, I think, experience. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the question is whether you can invoke applications in different tabs. Is that what you? Okay, no. So tabs. So our UX guys are very strict about how they define the user experience for different things because we have to stay consistent, right? So when the user sees tabs, they know it's the same application. But when the user sees things sliding in, they know it could be coming from another application, right? So it's about user experience. How much time do you have?
We have about 2.5 minutes.
All right, more questions. Yes. Oh, sorry.
I just have a short question. You said querying, you can see all the applications available for your specific action. Is that data that's also available inside the application, or is that something that is there a divide between it? Can I see what applications are available?
So you want to?
So I want to query, and I want to see, for instance, if other applications that I made are also available on the phone. Can my application know what other applications are available? Or is there a divide between that?
So you want to, the question is you want to query what are all the applications that are available on the device? Not
only my application, the specific
only
applications.
Your applications.
Yeah.
So you'd have to just search through the list, right?
Yeah, so the best way I know of doing this is create a really custom action or custom parameters that no one will ever know, and then querying based on that.
That's possible.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
My question is, when the platform Invoke is used, how does the system sort the list of applications? Because maybe if my application is the most used, I would like to be on top.
Great question. Yeah. So today, the framework. This is a question. Okay. I guess the question was said in the mic, so I don't have to repeat it. So to answer that question, today the system lists the application, lists the core applications first, because we trust them more. And list the third-party applications down below. However, there is a concept of frequency, how frequent the user uses your application, and also how recently they used your application. So based on those rankings, the system will also try to prioritize your application based on that. It's not just, as dumb as listing core applications first. But I'm not 100% sure if frequency is implemented already, but I do know it was in the works. So I don't know. If you reach out to me offline, I can confirm that or test it out. But I don't know the exact answer, whether it's there already. More questions? Yes.
So will that allow you to invoke an app without seeing like a card come up or seeing the actual application, just like doing an invoke behind the scenes?
Okay. The question is how the headless application experience is going to work when the headless framework invokes your application. Will it just bring in your application to the foreground, or does it get invoked in the background? It's supposed to get invoked invisibly, completely, because otherwise it won't be headless.
Right.
Yeah.
So as of right now, there's no way to invoke something invisibly.
No, there's absolutely no way, because we actually just started to define the user experience because we want to be very, very careful about this. This is very sensitive.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're done pretty much. So if you have more questions, I mean, we're game. We're going to be in the Jam space to follow up with you. And please try to integrate with Invocation Framework or else. We'll be very sad. So you can reach out to us. Actually, if you want to have more questions, we can share our contact information and whatnot. We're not a black box. Just go away in hiding. So, feel free to drop by in the Jam space, and we'll be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.